It is my pleasure to be with you again on this program this week, Our Warming World Going Beyond Green. I am Stephen Ipalibo-Lawson, your host on this series. Last week, we brought you reports on the impact of population growth and bush burning on the environment and how they affect climate change. We need to point out here that the activities that redefine and kickstart environmental processes and reactions appear ordinary on the surface. In other words, we don't take notice of those things that we do that impinges on the sustainability and functioning of the environment and its resources. A reminder to government to formulate policies that will check habitat expansion, that is, provision of eco-friendly housing for the increasing urban population. It is important to remind ourselves, especially our farmers and rural dwellers, on the negative impact of bush burning on the environment. This week, however, we shall gauge the awareness level of Nigerians on the phenomenon, climate change, and the impact on food security. It is an exciting edition of the program, and we will kickstart after the break. The more aware we are about the challenges and threats of anything in life, whether personal or professional, the better prepared we all can be in contributing our quota in a drive for better services. This trend of thought becomes even more applicable when it comes to climate change as a topic. Climate change is a long-term phenomenon, an environmental redirection process that started centuries ago and still ongoing. The more informed people are, the better prepared they will be to confront and creatively generate actions and change attitudes. The urgency of raising awareness about the impacts of climate change will give us all an advantage in time. In this regard, the media plays a critical role in bridging the gap between its audience and the different institutions working to develop new technologies and initiatives in mitigating and adapting to climate change. People need to be aware of the science of climate change, but the question is, are they? So in this report, we went to the streets to inquire how aware and knowledgeable people are about the subject of climate change.
The reality of climate change is glaring. We can see it everywhere, and we can feel it all around us. Something has gone wrong with the world. Mother Earth and her kindness seems to be eroding. No doubt, man has caused more havoc to his environment. Around the world, studies, discussions and negotiations on climate change have been held and still ongoing towards achieving mitigation and adaptation. In Nigeria, however, not much seems to have been done in terms of awareness on climate change. A vast majority of the people are still ignorant and denied the knowledge of global warming and climate change.
What I understand by climate change is maybe change of weather, or sometimes when we have longer days and shorter nights.
Climate change in Nigeria is various weather that we are experiencing.
Nǹkan tó mi rí sí àwọn nǹkan tó ṣẹlẹ̀ ní ọdún yìí ó ti pẹ́ tó ti wáyé bẹ́ẹ̀ níbi ọdún mẹ́ẹ̀ẹ́dógún sísìn. Òjò máa ń rọ̀ February lóòótọ́, but kò ń ṣe ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀.
Fall comes from January to maybe witness rainfall in June, July, August, and now it's not changing. We are now witnessing rainfall in January, February. So systematically and what? Looking at it, there's a change.
Bí weather wa ṣe wà tẹ́lẹ̀ láti àtijọ́ ó ti yàtọ̀ báyìí kò rí bí tẹ́lẹ̀ mọ́.
kí ni nǹkan tó ti change nínú weather wa.
Òjò tó rọ̀ léraléra bí nígbà ọ̀gbẹlẹ̀ tí ó yẹ ká rí òjò tí òjò rọ̀ ara effect ẹ̀ ni.
It's observable that the climate is changing, the weather itself. You know, when it's hot, it gets really hot. And you can imagine lately it's raining. So it's so quick, as in raining at January, February, March. So it's very observable that the weather is changing. And I think the major composition to all these things are all these chemical substances being released into the air. So I think it's one of the major contributory factors to the climate change.
When we talk about climatic distortions, we're talking about differentials in the weather patterns as it usually was before. Climate change basically has to do with a change in how the weather is. We're talking about rise in sea levels, we're talking about global warming, we're talking about unexpected change in weather patterns, we're talking about the increase in heat, and so many other uncomfortable weather conditions.
Climatic distortion is just because climate itself is an observation of weather over a period of time, about 30 years. And when you look at climate, there's a pattern that is normally established when you talk about climatic trends or the climate itself. But when this trend is having a lot of deviation, or the deviation is sharp enough from what is supposed to be expected, then you are now having like a distortion in the normal expected pattern.
I see the issue of climate change as a very symbiotic and interrelated issue, in the sense that one particular event, if you're talking about health, it actually relates to people's lifestyle, it relates to food production, it relates to so many things. So it's like a web that is interconnected together.
Global warming is change in weather patterns, which result from a series of human activities on the environment, such as deforestation, bush burning, emission of gas and carbon into the atmosphere. As a result of the above human activities, mankind is faced with different diseases like influenza and heart diseases. In order to save our lives, we have to change our attitude towards our environment. The United Nations Development Programme (UNDP) has identified behavioral change as a key factor to achieving mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Behavioral change implies a stop or reduction in activities that portends danger to the environment. Bush burning, gas flaring, deforestation are some of the major activities that contribute to global warming and ultimately climate change. There is an urgent need to step up awareness and advocacy on climate change among our people.
At the junior secondary level and primary school level, we need to inject some issues relating to climate change and environment into their curriculum and what they study at that level. So at that level, if you catch them young, there will be more awareness with respect to the issue, and even the pupils and the students can take back home their messages to their parents. Beyond television, radio programs, we need to involve the professionals, revisit the primary school curriculum, the primary and the secondary school curriculum, to inject the issue of climate change activities. So if you do that, I will go a long way.
I'm not sure that in Nigeria we're really that, aware of what this climate change thing is about. We have not embraced it sufficiently. We're not immersed in it. The rest of the world is moving on and are very concerned about it. Now, back in Nigeria, it's not on the front burner. It's not on the agenda. You hardly can see any of our, newspapers or media talk about climate change in the manner that the rest of the world is concerned about it. And that means our government needs to do a lot more. The NGOs and, and government parastatals need to awaken on the gravity of this climate change. We don't want to sit down and wait until we are swarmed by it. we're enveloped in it before we now wake up.
The issues are that we will disappear if we do not pay attention to the impact of climate change. The issues are that by 2025 there will be water stress almost the West African coast, from Gambia to Lagos, may disappear. These are the realities. So how do you cost that? So giving a little bit of money to somebody is not the issue. We should pay attention to it, but we should not lose our heads over this.
In Lagos State, there has been concerted efforts by the state government towards advocacy on climate change. The third Lagos State Summit on Climate Change, with a theme charting a roadmap for combating climate in Nigeria, was recently concluded. The summit provides an opportunity for stakeholders to brainstorm and step up advocacy on climate change in the state. Also in Lagos State, climate change clubs like these are being established in schools as a way of getting the younger generation involved in the fight against global warming.
Just go to this place.
There is no doubt the need for an expansive and consistent natural advocacy program by the federal government. Every Nigerian in the nooks and crannies of the country, literate or illiterate, must be adequately informed about climate change.
The problem with that, obviously, in Africa is that of the usage of foreign language, which also means that we cannot, we're talking about the level of understanding of majority of our peoples. I think indigenous language is a key tool, a key, factor in being able to reach the people better. I mean, and this may include the broken English, like I said, but importantly, I think all of these things we're doing is we need to be able to, break it down, translate it into our indigenous languages, and get our media to utilize local languages and medium which will be more understandable by the people in order to, get the most impact.
Relevant government agencies and parastatals like the Nigerian Meteorology Agency (NIMET), Nigeria Aviation Management Agency (NAMA), Federal Environmental Protection Agency (FEPA), and others should ensure that Nigerians are adequately informed and its consequences on livelihood.
Wow! It's amazing to see that contextually Nigerians seems to be aware of climate change and can place their hands on some of its impact as noticeable in change in rainfall patterns, sea level rise, and increase in global temperatures, among others. What we need to do is to step up the awareness level, which is vital to achieving adaptation and mitigation. That exactly is one of the reasons for this series. Food security is commonly understood to exist when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food, which meets with their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. In other words, food insecurity exists when people do not have adequate physical, social, or economic access to food. This is aggravated by the changing rainfall patterns, desertification, and flooding. Our next report provides a link between climate change indicators and food security.
Food security, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, is defined as a social condition when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary need and food preference for an active and healthy life. It is the key to survival, thus the maintenance of our stock of human resource. Climatic elements such as rainfall, humidity and sunshine are some of the factors required for constant agricultural practices so as to ensure food security in Nigeria.
The problem is, in recent years, our expectations of the outcome of weather events and, more interestingly, the climatic pattern is such that there has been quite a kind of departure from what we expect, and as such it has kind of affected our socioeconomic activities, particularly that we just talked about food security. In the first place, our agricultural system is rain-fed. It means it depends almost solely on agriculture, and where that is not the situation, we have supplemental irrigation. But the important thing is that it is rain-fed, and as such, the timing of the growing period and all farm practices are determined by the dates of the onset and cessation of the rainy season. And as such, it informs the growing period. Once there is a distortion in this, it affects our cropping patterns, how much of an area can be cropped within a particular growing period time.
With the recent fluctuations in climatic conditions across the globe, for instance, reduced rainfall in some areas, drought, flooding and late rainfall, there has been reduced production by agriculturists in some areas or states in Nigeria with respect to their annual crop yield. As a result, this leads to high prices of food items in the market, thereby limiting people's access to food. Global warming, which is caused by gaseous emissions from vehicles, motorbikes, generators, fumes from industries, uncontrolled bush burning, and other factors, is the major cause of these changes in climatic patterns. Since these emissions and other factors that cause global warming are constant and are not controlled by governments and other regulatory bodies, there will likely be a continuous reduction in crop yield annually, which will consequently lead to food insecurity in Nigeria. The question now is, how do we make agriculture sustainable despite the fluctuating climatic patterns affecting the world today in order to guarantee food security in Nigeria?
Knowledge exchange is very, very important. You see, we need to make the farmers know that climate is changing and it's a challenge for them. It's going to influence the way they produce. It's going to influence the yield, the amount of yield that they have on their farmland. And these are some of the things there is need for adjustment. So that is the adaptation aspect. I mean, it is not about the grammar, but it is about what to do. For instance, adjusting the time that planting is done, adjusting the time that nutrients are added into the soil, adjusting the time of irrigation. These are some of the adjustments that are required. So we need to step up extension services to reach these rural farmers and educate them on some of these issues. Then, of course, local knowledge is very, very important. Let us harness local knowledge. Let us combine it with scientific findings and make sure that we combine these two to improve the lots of.
We are in a transition period in the climatic regime of this part of the world. And the fact that we're in a transition period means we have two options. One, in terms of rain-fed agriculture, we have to kind of do a lot of studies to understand the changing regime of the rainfall patterns, one. Then two, while we're doing that, we should look for alternative means of getting what we want as well. It means we have to spend much more money on irrigation, because for irrigation you can be sure once you know the quantum of water needed, it means you can plant all year round. It's going to be quite expensive, but it's something we have to adjust to for now until we know for sure what the new climatic regime is going to be like. So it calls for studies, intensive studies on our climatic patterns, and it calls for the need for better weather predictions better equipment for prediction so that we can tell the real-time, on-time weather patterns that will suit the production of our agricultural activities here.
Food security is and will remain among the most burning issues in Africa for the next 10 years and beyond, with available projections putting the number of food insecure people by 2020 at about 500 million. Sub-Saharan Africa, as stated in the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa UNECA 2010 report, is said to be the most food insecure region in the world, with the state of food security being constantly put at risk by the impacts of adverse climate change. I am certain that today's episode of the program provides adequate insight into the reality of climate in our country, the understanding of the phenomenon by the people, and how it poses threat to food security in Nigeria. Our expectation on this series is that we will have purposeful contributions from you, our viewing public. So keep the comments coming. We will surely acknowledge them. Till next week, when we bring you another edition of Our Warming World Going Beyond Green. Be climate aware for a greener Nigeria. I am Stephen Ipalibo-Lawson, your host, saying goodbye.